There are moments in life when the weight becomes so heavy, when the silence inside us becomes so loud, that we start to believe the world would be better without us. And yet sometimes, all it takes is one small act, an act so simple, so unexpected, to pull us back from the edge. This is the story of a young woman who stood at the breaking point of her life, ready to let go, until a stranger's hug reminded her that even in the darkest hour, hope can find us. Her name was Emily. She was 22 years old, living in a small apartment in Denver, Colorado. If you had passed her on the street, you might not have noticed her. She wasn't the loudest voice in a crowd. She wasn't the kind of person who drew attention. She was quiet, reserved, and always wore that polite half smile that people often mistake for contentment. But behind that smile, Emily was crumbling. She had moved to Denver with big dreams. She wanted to be a writer, to create stories that touched people's hearts. She pictured herself sitting in cozy coffee shops, typing away on her laptop, maybe even publishing a book one day. But reality rarely matches the picture we paint. Rent was high. Jobs were scarce. She worked long shifts at a diner, barely making enough to cover the bills, and every rejection email from publishers cut her a little deeper. Her friends from college had scattered across the country, each chasing their own success. Social media only reminded her of everything she wasn't achieving. Engagement announcements, new jobs, happy travels. Meanwhile, she was stuck, alone, exhausted, invisible. And then came the blow that nearly broke her. Her mother, the one person she always leaned on, was diagnosed with cancer. Emily wanted to fly home to Ohio to be by her side, but she couldn't afford to leave her job. She felt torn in two, guilty for not being there, guilty for barely holding herself together. Nights grew longer, darker. She stopped writing. She stopped calling her friends back. Some days, she even stopped eating. The walls of her apartment seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. One rainy evening in November, Emily sat on the floor by her window, staring out at the blurry streetlights. The city outside moved as if nothing was wrong, but inside she felt like she was drowning. She opened her journal, the one she hadn't touched in weeks, and wrote only 3 words. I can't anymore. Can't. She closed the journal, placed it neatly on her desk, and for the first time, she began to think about how she might end it all. The thought terrified her and comforted her at the same time. Terrified her because she knew, deep down, she didn't truly want to die. Comforted her because it felt like the only way to stop the pain. That night, she put on her coat and walked out into the rain. Her feet carried her almost unconsciously towards the bridge that overlooked the river. It was late, the streets nearly empty, the sound of raindrops mixing with the hum of distant traffic. She stood at the edge of the bridge, gripping the cold metal railing, her tears blending with the rain on her face. Her heart pounded, her mind screamed. A battle raged within her. She thought of her mother, of her sister, of the people who would be left behind. But another voice whispered louder. "They'll be fine without you. You're a burden. You're not enough." Emily leaned forward slightly, the water below a blur of blackness. And in that moment, she believed no one would even notice if she was gone. But fate has a way of stepping in, sometimes in the quietest of ways. A man was jogging by that night, his hoodie pulled up, headphones in his ears. He almost didn't notice her. But something, maybe the way she was standing, maybe the stillness of her posture, made him slow down. He pulled out his earbuds and stopped. "Hey," he said gently, his voice barely audible over the rain. Emily startled, quickly wiping at her face. "I'm fine," she whispered. But she wasn't fine, and he could see it. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her further. "Listen," he said softly. "I don't know what's going on, but you don't have to do this." Emily shook her head, her body trembling. "You don't understand." "You're right," he admitted. "I don't. But I know what it feels like to think the world is better off without you. And I also know it's a lie." She turned to look at him then. His eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with something else. Understanding. He didn't lecture her. He didn't tell her to cheer up or be grateful. Instead, he did something so simple it pierced through her numbness. He stepped forward and without hesitation opened his arms. "Can I give you a hug?" he asked. Emily froze. She hadn't been hugged in weeks, maybe months. Slowly, almost against her own will, she nodded. And when he wrapped his arms around her, something inside her cracked open. She sobbed. She sobbed harder than she ever had, her whole body shaking as years of pain and exhaustion poured out. The stranger held her, not letting go, not rushing her, just letting her exist in that moment. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not alone. You matter. You're going to get through this." And for the first time in so long, Emily believed it might be true. That hug didn't solve her problems. It didn't cure her mother's illness. It didn't erase her bills or bring her writing career overnight success. But it gave her something she hadn't felt in months: connection. Proof that even when everything felt empty, she was still seen, still valued. The stranger, whose name was Mark, ended up walking her home that night. They sat in her tiny kitchen, drinking tea, talking about nothing and everything. Mark told her about his own struggles, about the nights when he too had felt the darkness closing in. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't perfect, but he was real. And his presence reminded her that she wasn't broken beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to heal. She reached out to her sister, confessed how badly she'd been struggling. She started seeing a counselor, slowly untangling the knots inside her. She wrote again. Not grand novels, not polished essays, just small pieces, reflections of her pain and her hope. Her mother's treatments were hard, but Emily visited as often as she could, holding her mother's hand and realizing that love, even in suffering, was still powerful. And through it all, she carried the memory of that night on the bridge. The night a stranger's hug reminded her that her story wasn't over. Years later, Emily would publish her first book. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its way into the hands of people who needed it. And in the dedication, on the very first page, she wrote, "To the stranger who hugged me when I wanted to give up, you saved my life." So what can we learn from Emily's story? Sometimes we believe that helping someone means fixing their problems, giving them answers, or carrying their burdens. But often, what people need most is something far simpler. A reminder that they are not invisible. A gesture that says, "I see you. I care." It might be a smile, a kind word, a message, or even a hug. We may never know how deeply our actions impact someone else. To us, it may feel small. To them, it may mean the difference between despair and hope, between giving up and holding on. Emily's life was saved not by grand speeches or perfect solutions, but by human connection. And her story is a reminder for all of us. Never underestimate the power of kindness. Never assume your small act doesn't matter, because sometimes it matters more than anything. And if you, right now, are standing at the edge of your own bridge, whether literal or invisible, let this story be a whisper to your heart. You are not alone. You matter. Your story is still unfolding. Hold on. Because even in the darkest night, light can find you. That is the story of the stranger's hug that saved her from suicide.